Good morning. As promised in the Indian style, as I will be waiting till Hamid will ask me a question. Before that happens, I can tell you something about India. Also, as promised. It's also customary for our meetings that I am starting to tell my story before you come, Qatar, and ask me questions. So I am intending to do the same, only using the Indian accent. I have recently checked it's not true that only 50 million people in India speak good English. It's more than 200 million people who speak good English. So basically, India is the English speaking nation number two in the world. If we can, of course, speak about India in the term of one nation, because you know that India is more like a European Union of Asia than a one nation only. But can you say that there is only one nation when you have almost no more than a billion people in one country, and with 50 languages, like more or less, maybe even with the smaller languages, maybe it's even more. Some tell that India has over 1,000 languages, but but 50 languages is 50 big languages. Of course, the most popular is Hindi, almost 400 million users, and then Gujarati, which is maybe something like 120 million, Bengali, and yeah, and the smaller languages. Yes, yes. As you see, I'm late, but I am not so late that it would be possible to make the speed to make the communication. But where are you? Am I going to wait long for you today? Do you know who have coined the term third world, for instance? Because third world, it was basically a term that is relating to India and the other countries that are a little bit like India. It was the Prime Minister of India, Jawaharlal Nehru, who coined this term third world. It is usually some sort of a joke for people in developed countries to make poke fun at the third world, but it's not true. At the beginning, it was something very, 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 very positive. It was about that India will not be coming on the path of communism or capitalism, but will have a mixed system that some element of capitalism and some element of socialism put together and combined. This is exactly what Jawaharlal Nehru has done, and it was going well for some countries, some decades, but he was basically thinking that being a third world country will make the India immune for any foreign attacks, but it wasn't so. The Chinese, for instance, they have attacked the part of Tibet that were previously owned by China, and India lost all these fragments of territory. Well, third world, it meant that at the beginning, it meant that you have basically a country which is neutral in the all the conflict between communism and capitalism, and just as it's combining in its own economy the elements of capitalism and socialism, politically it would mean that they are not sticking with any country that is defining themselves as the capitalist or socialist nation. It meant that India will be making its own group of nations, friendly nations. It was exactly done so. And India had the Jawaharlal Nehru and his administration. They really hoped that it would be possible to gather all the Arab nations, the neutral nations, to make them all in one camp, one political camp worldwide, under the influence and and commandeering of India. But unfortunately, for instance, they were counting for the countries of Africa and of America, the parts of America which were not dominated by the European culture, but basically those for first and foremost those which were not dominated by mm, uh, not dominated by European nations, but dominated by Indians, South American, Latin American, Asians, Indians, I mean. And on those countries, India was counting too. Yes, you probably should get used to Indian accent because it's going to be more and more popular worldwide. Many people in other countries already believe the Indian accent is the correct pronunciation, believe it or not. But for instance, when you take people from Thailand, they think that Indian pronunciation is probably good. Yes, yes, it's not a joke. And because I was thinking that it's only like 50 million people more take or leave. Uh, 50 million people in India that we can communicate easily in English, but it's more. Hello, Shahib. But it's more. It's almost 200 million people. So basically, India is not the English-speaking nation number two, as I thought, number three, as I thought after Germany, because Germany is, of course, not a English-speaking people, but exactly like in India, there are many people in Germany that can speak English, like to communicate easily. Yes, wait a minute. I will finish my sentence and then you ask the question. So you can write down the question and I will attend to it when I can. So please write your question. Okay, so basically, I thought that there is because you have like 60% of Germans who are speaking English, and most of them can communicate pretty easily. That would mean that you would have like 55 million Germans that can really speak English. And I thought that in India the number would be very similar. But in the recent years, there are more and more Indians that can really speak fluent English. Of course, with a funny accent very often, as I am now presenting. But nevertheless, so they are almost 200 million people. So now India is the English-speaking country. Maybe it sounds very funny, but it is so. And Germany is the third biggest English-speaking nation. Canada is no no then it would be it would be right. No, it would be United States, Great Britain, then India, then Germany. Yes, and then Canada, which is funny, but it is so. Now ask a question, man. What are you waiting for? I don't see any question. It doesn't have to be about India. It's a general Q&A. I only started to talk about India because I'm always talking a story that is connected with my outfit. And I did precisely that. When I was dressed as Napoleon, I was basically say, telling you stories about France and Napoleon. King Sus? King Sus? I don't understand. King Sus. Good tea. What is the King Sus? People can stand this accent, but as I said, you should get used to it because it's getting more and more popular in the world. This is basically more popular in accent than the British accent. Less popular than American accent, but more popular worldwide than British accent. A little bit, not a very big difference. Good. I don't understand Simon Tomczyk's question. Simon, could you explain? Could you elaborate a little bit on your question? King Sus? Ah, you mean Augustus II? Well, he basically reformed his own Saxon army in Saxony. But it was more a cosmetic difference between because they replaced red uniforms with white uniforms. Because it was customary then in 18th century Europe that Protestant nation would have soldiers in red uniforms or with blue uniforms. So when they switched from Protestantism to Catholicism, it would mean that they should be applying white uniforms instead of red or blue. It actually was traditionally using red uniforms, but when the Prince Elector have converted to Catholicism, it was understood that it should be also a cosmetic change in the army. Odyssey to 2001, it's a little bit better. Let's have some sense of proportion. Odyssey 2001 offers you more than you have at least this revolted robot that is keeping everybody like in prison. So there is a real action in this movie. It's not like the movie that I just watched about the Blade Runner 2049, which was basically the psychological problems of Harrison's Ford character all along. It was not really a story about many other things. Oh, Poles think about many nations in the wrong way, even about Germans and French, not to mention the Swedes or Indians. I am not Islamic. I am Hindu tonight. What English language magazines or other sources you recommend as reliable sources about the West and what is going on there, in there? Well, I think that it is very, very, very hard to find a good journalism today. Basically, they are. Oh my God! Oh my many, many gods! I think this is very hard to find any good newspapers today. So I would about the. There was a newspaper that it was a collection, a magazine from many newspapers, which was called Forum, but it's not so good anymore. Thank you, sir. but it's not as good anymore as it used to be. This forum magazine, because it's now dominated by leftism like everything else. It's hard to say what to read. I am blessed with the possibility to read to watch movies in different languages, so it's hard to skip this really, because sometimes I think that it's maybe made on purpose. Then in English language, what we can find is basically some rubbish about the European Union and not about the particular things of particular political things in the particular countries. And this is very highly problematic, because if you really want to, I remember when I was working in the Poznan library, university library, I was shocked that because we were accepting new books as well as those books which were the collections of private collections of people. And our job was also to think to check if we already have those books or not. I mean the second sort of books. Because with the new ones, of course, it meant that they are supposed to send us new books because they were just published, and we were supposed to get some as the big library copy. So, and I was shocked that when the new books came, that like one quarter of them used to be about John Paul II, and the other quarter was about the European Union, and the maybe like 10% was also about the very smallish partisan groups during World War II in Poland. So basically, all the old facts put together, some facts and some photos, and published it. So it was very funny that almost half of all the information that you would find in the library, and I mean, the new books, that would they were of very, very, very low quality. You would probably get more information about all those issues just by flicking through Wikipedia articles. And that was very, very sad and strange. If I would run this library, I would not accept so many books about the rubbish. So only half of the new books, but on the shelves it looked a little bit better when you were in the storage and you saw what books exactly there are, because it used to be probably run better in the past periods. And it was very easy to find a rubbish 1,000 rubbish books which were not providing you many information about European Union or John Paul II, and maybe even less than the very, very, very average article in Wikipedia or a similar website. And the you had about the European Union or for the second, yes. But when you wanted, if you wanted to see, for instance, what happened in Portugal in 1970s, you could not find a single book about it. And Portugal is not some like very, very, very exotic country. It is a country that even had some colonies in India, in Goa. And so it is a worldwide known nation, and still no books at all about this country. I found just one book about 18th century Portugal, and I was very happy. Of course, I made a copy. Poles think about Sweden in the wrong way. Sometimes I think that the Swedes would like us to believe that they are some kind of elves or some other creatures from the woods, from the forest. That they want to pose as the crazy ecologic people who are concentrated only on trees and animals and things like that, but they are really very powerful nation and a proud nation, and they know that trygghet means it means security in Swedish. Trygghet, it's a very, 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 very important issue. So, for instance, they have up to some moment they were accepting the situation when the Germans took over the mm, the place when they produced submarines, but they produced submarines in cockums. Yes, it is called cockums. And the Germans, they have at one moment they have decided that they will get rid of the whole series of these submarines, and did not consult it even with the Swedes. And the Swedes got very, very angry, which is understandable in these circumstances. And the Swedes came with their long barrel guns, and they put the Germans onto the wall, and they make them to sell this Kockums ship factory. I don't remember how it is in English. The ship factory. They made them to sell it to the Swedish government, because if the Germans did not would discontinue to produce the production of those ships, that would mean a very high, very big trouble, very big trouble. I mean, problems plus problem plus trouble means trouble, trouble, very big trouble for Sweden's security. No, I just say that maybe it is intentional for the Swedes to present themselves as most peaceful as they are. It is. I think that Sweden is some sort of opposite case than Israel. Israel is presenting itself and its army as a very fierce and powerful force. In reality, Israeli army is not that strong. It's of course very good organized, but it's not very strong. You know, the military budget of Israel is very similar to Polish budget, and also to Swedish budget, military budget. So basically, Israel is not a very big force militarily, but Israel is presenting itself as if it were, and it's surrounded by the country which are very disorganized already, much more populous than Israel, but in comparison, they are far worse organized. And because of that, Israel has the upper hand in many conflicts, and is already usually already better informed what is happening before it happens. But it does not mean that there were not a situation in the history of Israel when there was many very big trouble, and they were surprised by the Arabs, the Arab states. So basically, Israel is presenting itself internationally as more fierce and powerful and militaristic than it really is, and Sweden the other way around. They are pretty militaristic, and they have the real plans of war against Russia if it's needed, if they are forced. And they are the only one who knows what is happening when the Russians are spying aircraft, and the Swedes are usually are the only ones to know and to spot them, and they can react, but usually they are not reacting. Sometimes they are only informing all the other Baltic states about the situation, and that's all. But the important thing is that the Danish, for instance, they do not know that the Russians are spying with their aircraft. The same, the Finns are not aware of this. The Latvians, the Lithuanians, even we, of course, not also not, and the Swedes are the only ones who knows what is happening. If the Russians will go with their spying aircraft more to the west, there are many nations that can spot them with this new modern up-to-date equipment, but not in the Baltic area. In the Baltic area, Sweden is the only one. So basically, Swedes are a very, very powerful nation when it comes to military, although they are not spending so much. They have completely resigned from. They did not. Totally ditched the frigates, because frigates are not very useful on the Baltic, and because Baltic is not a very, and for instance, and they also have this shattered coastline. And when they have the shattered coastline with so many small gulfs and with so many peninsulas and islands, that is better to have a small corvettes and to make them make the good camouflage, and this is famous. Those are famous photos, and you can even find them on Facebook and on Google. Just type their camouflage Swedish military ship or Swedish corvette camouflage or something like this. They are practically sometimes unrecognizable against the background of the Swedish magnificent nature and the rocks and the plants and so on. I am Hindu. I am not Islamic because of some radical Islamists. We have to have the security checks before the cinemas. Before people are coming into the cinemas, there is a security check with the so not only the Lego Merkel Lego, but also some kind of different precautions, because it would be a very spectacular for a crazy Islamic terrorist to make the full explosion in among the crowd of Indians, the Hindus and atheists and Catholics, and because maybe maybe you don't know, but in India there are also many Christians, many Christians in the Goa state, which used to belong to the Portuguese. There are many Catholics, and far more to the south, but also on the western coast. There is the state of Kerala, and there are many Kerala. They say, I don't remember, and there are many Anglicans there, or Episcopalians, as the American prefer to call them. You know probably that in America there are also Anglicans, but they call themselves Episcopalians. From the moment of the American Revolution, they did not want to be so much connected with the British, so they changed the name, and they are calling them by the other name. Then the Episcopalians do not include this Anglia or something in mm, the name, so it's better. I don't remember. I think the Indians don't have this problem. So, although there are many people who think that the Indians dislike the British very harsh, but it's not true. Actually, there are many people, especially in Bengal, who are they are missing a little bit the British and the British role of the British Raj in India, because in the old British India, it was customary that the cultural principal cardinal region was Bengal. And in Bengal, all that was interesting what happened in Bengal. And now it is totally different. Now the cultural and economical life in India is concentrated in New Delhi, Bangalore, and so on. They are totally different region. Also north, but northeast, not northwest, not northeast. So, so the Bengalis are sometimes very fond of the old British Empire, and they would would like it to come back in some form, but not with the British. But the idea that Bengali would be the principal province, the principal state again, why not, right? So they are very nostalgic about the British Raj. Not all Indians are also happy about, but of course the spirit in the region of Delhi, New Delhi, and the northeastern part of India is totally different, and they are making more and more movies about the silly English or the English that are not nice to Indian people. And for instance, there is a film in which there was the plot is that the English have organized of course, the game of cricket, and the Indians are very good in cricket, because they learned it to the British taught them, and the Indians are offered with the situation that they will not pay any tax from the village. They're ruining very high tax. They could avoid it if they beat the British in cricket. And of course, in this film, the Indians are have some problems with it, but they beat the British in cricket, and they don't have to pay taxes. It is very typical plot of the Indian film about the days of the British Raj. But if film like that would be made in Bengal, that would probably portray the British in far better way. And maybe you know that there is a constant looking for a people who look European. They do not have to be necessarily British, but they are. You can be surprised if you come to India as tourist. You can be asked if you would like to play in the great Bollywood movies about the British Raj or the British Empire in India, because they are constantly looking for people who to provide the film with more, white European faces. And sometimes, for instance, the Russian tourists are playing the British soldiers on the second plan during the Bollywood historical films. Yes, yes. India and China dislike each other very much. They are not historically they historically did not have much contacts. There were not much contact between many relations between China and India, because China, as you probably know, the Chinese are living first and foremost in the coastal western part, eastern part, coastal part of their country, because the two-thirds of China's territory is not very good for agriculture. Then that's why the Chinese are living, especially on these 500 kilometers, maybe 1,000 kilometers from the eastern coast into the depth of their territory. So most of the Chinese are living there. So the Chinese regions that are bordering with India are not very densely populated. So precisely for this reason historically there were not so many contacts between India and China. India would have an upper hand with China, because the regions that are bordering China are very densely populated in India and not very scarcely populated in China. And what's more, there are regions which are populated not only by the Han Chinese but by the ethnic minorities. But the Chinese are and in general far more militarily superior, and the Indians are not crazy enough to start anything. So the relations are very bad. And also, the Chinese have many connections, especially on the field of economy with Pakistan, because the Chinese have introduced, as you probably know, in the late 1960s or something like that. No, it was later. It was later. It was already the Deng Xiaoping idea, I think. They have introduced this one-child policy, and now they have not enough people to work in the industry, and they are counting on the Pakistanis. The Pakistanis have very good hands, and Pakistanis are very crafty, very handy, and they are producing many interesting uniforms. And I am buying sometimes those uniforms. They are made in Sialkot. In Sialkot is a city which is more or less of the size of like the size of Poznan in the northern Pakistan, and they are producing wonderful uniforms. So they are very crafty people, and many children and so on. So the Chinese are counting on the Pakistanis. The Pakistanis are in debt in China. The China are the creditors, and for this being those creditors, the Chinese have got two naval bases from Pakistan, and India was very disturbed by this, because they have Chinese ships on the right and Chinese ships on the left. And India are not very fond of this situation, because India is accustomed to the situation that they are the only powerful nation by the Indian Ocean. And all the other nations, neighboring nations that are also bordering Indian Ocean, are not very powerful at all. And India should be the only one. So when they have the Chinese fleet, very close to their territory and the coast, they tend to be pretty nervous. India is a country of contrast. On one hand, there is, for instance, in the 1970s, when they were still combining the elements of capitalism and communism, and they were it functioning like it was functioning like in such a way that mm, the ruling party, the National Congress, would recommend somebody for the director of the big company. So it was partly private, partly state-owned and state-run, and those factories were, of course, limited by the policy of the administration. So there was much corruption, and still is sometimes, but it was partly private, so it was functioning more or less. And they were also influenced by engineers from the Soviet Union and so on. As you probably know, the Indian fleet is combined of the ships produced by Russia and produced by the Union and produced by Britain. And the tanks are first and foremost of Soviet and Russian production. So India is saved because from the big problems with Pakistan and China, because India is a pal of Russia. Russia and India traditionally had very, very good relations. So, and still have. So Russia is helping India still. But in the 1980s, it was customary that India would have problems with agriculture and with collecting harvests, and that there could be even a food shortage. Maybe not a great hunger, but a food shortage, yes. And was very customary for the Soviet Union to set even food to starving India. So if you are helped with your agriculture from the Soviet Union, that means that you are probably not in a very good condition, right? But now it's a situation in India is like that. Nobody is starving in India. There are food is provided for everyone, and India is a very big agricultural country. There are many good lands, many good for agriculture, and when they are properly managed and they are properly managed, and there is no mixed economy but a normal economy from 1990s. The only capitalistic economy, but still the administration is pretty powerful and corrupted, but it's still nevertheless a new capitalistic economy. So there is no one is going starving in India, and the products of Indian agriculture are very affordable, are very cheap, very affordable for the Indian people. The situation is completely different if you want to eat something which was not cultivated in India. For instance, when you go to McDonald's, you must remember that it's a very luxury restaurant in India, because the products are made in the United States or according to Western techniques, or with some elements which were cultivated in the States, and they are far more expensive. So if you go to McDonald's in India, which would the one surprise would be that would be some nothing made of cow or nothing made of pig. So basically, the burger would be a poultry burger of turkey, of chicken, and that's all. And many veggie burgers. Veggie burgers were invented for the Indians, not for the Western people. Yes. So there are many contrasts. Some people are very rich, some people are very poor, but nobody is starving, and that's something. And the funny thing is that India has many different types of its own satellites. That means that on average, in India, the internet is functioning much better than, for instance, in Poland. So India is a country of contrast. I don't remember what India built in Bhutan, but they have also highly qualified engineers, so maybe they have built something. I do not know really about the British monarchy. When I look about for there are many people in India so who are fascinated by the with the English monarchy. When the Indians are thinking about Europe, they basically think about London. If the people from India are have the opportunity and they are not very if they are not very rich and they have the opportunity to visit Europe, they would visit England because that means something for them. And France, not necessarily, Germany, not necessarily, although the relations with Germany and France are correct. The India has very good relation with all the with many countries on the whole in the whole globe, but not necessarily with the countries who are exactly neighboring countries. With neighbors, not so good relation. No, no, no. For instance, the people from Tamil Nadu, they are sometimes try to overthrow the government of Sri Lanka because the government of Sri Lanka is Buddhist and the Tamil Nadu region in the southern in the south eastern part of India. This region is very, very, very Hinduistic and very, very Hinduistic, very fiercely Hinduistic. And sometimes they even organized fleets to go to Sri Lanka and try to overthrow the government. They did it several times. They did several attempts already and they were very, very, very nasty situation. But India has many problems with all the neighbors. They try to influence the situation in Nepal, but recently the Chinese have supported the Maoistic revolution in Nepal, and Nepal is now dominated politically by China. The king of Nepal was overthrown, and Nepal was traditionally under the influence of the Hinduistic culture and of India itself, but not anymore. Now Chinese gets it in this sphere of influence. I'm afraid, and it was a relation about the because some of you have mentioned the problems with the Polish knowledge about what is happening in the world and were problems with the Polish press. Do you know that when the Maoistic government replaced the Hinduistic government, royal government in Nepal, and the Chinese influence government replaced the Indian influence government in Nepal? What was the comment in Polish press? Nothing. The only mention I found really that was really saying something. It was not being a very short mention. It was information that they are were it was the it was in this small addition to Gazeta Wyborcza, which is called Wysokie Obcasy. Wysokie Obcasy mentioned the revolution in Nepal, instigated by the Chinese. But they said only something about the Nepalians. I don't know. The people of Nepal can congratulate themselves that they have elected a woman president, a woman to a president for the first time in the history. They have a very important politician who is a woman. Oh, big deal, big deal, big deal. And they did not mention that this woman is basically very, very, very radically Maoistic and she is insane, basically. But they did not mention that. So they only interpreted the situation from a feminist perspective. So I guess that even the journalist, the famous and wonderful journalist of Gazeta Wyborcza and Wysokie Obcasy, which is connected to Gazeta Wyborcza, are not really aware what is happening in Nepal. Pity, eh? It is my commentary about the quality of Polish press and I rest my case. You mean Hindus or Indians? Because Indians are all the citizens of India, and most of those are Hindus. And Hindus, correctly, I know that there is some confusion in Polish language about it, but Hindus is basically a person who is professing is believing in Hinduism. What is going now here? Some crazy person is writing something about the Ku Klux Klan. Why do Hindus often works as doctors or technical support? Is the polygamy common? No, polygamy is banned in India. It could be, it is not permitted anymore for many decades now. Because you know the governments of India, it does not even mean much if they are if the government is run by the National Congress, that is the party that had directed the independence process of India in the 1940s and 1950s. But it does not many. It does not the big difference when it's also when India is ruled by the BGN party. BGN party is something Yanata. I don't remember the whole name. BJN party is much more nationalistic, much more traditional, but they still are very progressive in a way, because they, for instance, support the marriages between people of different caste, different social stratas. So there is not a problem with that. But and now for the last 2 decades, the marriage between the people of different castes, different sorts, is more and more popular. And it was a taboo question like 40 years ago. Yes, I think that Europe would make really fine against the Bolsheviks. Do you really think that if people of Poland would not stop the Bolsheviks would reach France and win against the French with the French army, the crack divisions of the First World War? Impossible. The French would stop. The maybe not Germans, because German army was already limited as the punishing measure after World War One for being aggressive towards other nations. But I cannot picture a situation in my brain when the Bolsheviks come over Poland and go to France and they are winning against the French. The very, very unprofessional Red Army would not win against the French or the French British coalition. So the notion that Poland saved Europe from Bolshevik occupation is nonsense. I'm sorry. It's a very good thing that we have beaten the communists. It's a very good thing, but does not mean that the same way with for instance, with the Battle of Britain. The pilots in the Battle of Britain, they did not save Britain, then save much trouble to Britain. The Polish pilots, those 140 pilots, they did pretty well, but only one of the six Polish divisions was very squadrons was very effective. So only one 303 was so effective. It was effective far over the average. But those six squadrons, they were just like the average. So Polish pilots in general, they helped, but their partaking was by no means decisive. And even if Germans somehow would won the Battle of Britain, aircraft against aircraft, the Royal Navy was 10 times stronger than the Kriegsmarine. So no problem here. It would be impossible for the Germans to make really this invasion. They really, what the Germans really wanted to do, it was to blackmail the English to sign a peace treaty with them, so they would have free hands to deal with the Ruskies. Yes, the French were generally better in India than the English, yes. And they also understood the nature of the thinking of Indians, that they would have to make gifts all the time and negotiate, not blackmail, just negotiate. That was a better approach. The French had better approach. The French also had a better approach towards the other Indians in America, towards the Huron and the others. Not always, but very often. I know that there were people from British Army who were just observing what is happening, and they were more sympathetic with the Confederacy. But I don't think that there were some Hindus involved. And in 1860s, there were many immigrants from Europe, but not so much from other Asian countries and perhaps China. Because you must remember, then before 1870s, 1880s, there was no railroad across the whole corp of United body of the United States. So it would mean that, for instance, on the in California, that were sometimes like half of the entire settlements were consisting of the Chinese, because for them it was very they would just go over the Pacific. Modi is representing the BJN. Yes, this is the it is not the traditionally strongest party. This is the opposition party usually in the nationalistic party, but they are also progressive. Relations with India and Soviet Union very good. I already told that. I have nothing, not so much to say about Jainism. I don't want to make the fool of myself because I am not very informed about this branch of Hinduism. I already told you that there were no Hindus regiment. Some individuals maybe would be were involved, but Churchill was often wrong about India, and he also he wanted to keep India. So he was pushing sometimes very hard, but it does not mean that he was very hostile to Indians. Churchill was very hostile to Muslims, but not to for the radical fanatic religious beliefs of Islam. But he was not at all. I think he was not against the Indians, but he was very harsh, and he sometimes he once caused some food shortage even as sort of blackmailing the Indians once in the 19 uh, as the Lord of Admiralty, so it was probably like early 20s. But he was all the time a minister of something. Hard to say. Well, Churchill wanted to keep India, and India separated from the British Empire when Churchill was no longer Prime Minister. Clement Attlee was. Portuguese Goa, I don't remember what really happened in Portuguese Goa. I think the Indians have taken it in late 50s or something like this. It was definitely later than the Declaration of Independence for India as a whole. But India, I think, blackmailed the Portuguese to give back Goa. Yes, in the 50s. So the Portuguese Empire would consist from this moment on only of Mozambique and Angola in Africa both. No, no, taking back Goa was after gaining independence from the British. And gaining independence from the British, it was like 1947. It was already after, and it is often attributed to Mahatma Gandhi, as Mahatma Gandhi was such some sort of with his ahimsa, and he's not using the force, and he's not using the violence and so on. But what really was the decisive factor for the situation was that the British during the World War II armed like 3 million Hindus, 3 million Indians. And those 3 million Indians were armed against the Japanese aggression through Burma, because the Japs took Burma, but they did not took India itself. So to protect India from the Burmese side, 3 million Hindus were armed by the British government. And those 3 million Hindus, there were a powerful force of blackmailing the British to negotiate some kind of autonomy on and then independence. So it was not Mahatma Gandhi. Sorry. And I told it already in the eastern India, especially in Bengal, but not only. In Kolkata, which is now called Kolkata, again the Indian name, not anymore British Calcutta or Calcutta or anything like that, but Kolkata. But also in Madras, also cities like this, also in Bombay, there are many people who are missing the British Empire, and they because the eastern part of India was more important back in the day of the British in India, and now and now the western part of India with Delhi, Bangalore, New Delhi is more with Assam is more important. So it changed, and the eastern Indians are missing a little bit their importance. They are not really missing the British Empire, but it's all connected. They feeling of importance. Yes, I have recorded, for instance, a couple of films about the natural and technological disasters, and for instance, the episode that I made about the problem in Bhopal in 1984. It was not as popular as, for instance, Chernobyl Fukushima episode. So it is, although Bhopal 1984. It's the biggest technological catastrophe in the history of humankind or mankind. So, but it's only India, right? So, yes, there is. I remember that it was a discussion that maybe we should withdraw an embassy from Delhi, and it's very crazy. And at the same time, we have two embassies, one in the Vatican. What the hell for? We have embassy in Rome. They could do both. Many nations have both Rome and Vatican in the one place, but still, and one ambassador. But now we must, of course, be big Catholics, although we cannot really have anything with the contact with the Vatican, diplomatically, economically. But we discussed the possibility of withdrawing a Polish embassy from Delhi. We didn't do it, but it's crazy. This is a developing country. You already the economy of India is more or less of the size of economy of France. So it's a very powerful nation already, and it's growing and growing. And in the difference between the population of India and the population of China is very small. And in like 10 years, India will be the most populated country in the entire world. And this is sure because the Chinese had this crazy politics of only one child for many many decades, and now the Chinese they can have three children, but they are so much accustomed to the situation that they don't even know want more than one child, and they are over pamper them, and they over stress the children because they are depending on only one child, and the child simply must have a success in so it's all pretty nervous, and they call those only children, they call them little emperors because they are so spoiled being an only child. There is totally different situation in India when some families still have like 4 or 5 children, no problem. No, I do not practice yoga. It is very, as I always mention when I'm making jokes about India, I always mention that it's a very funny thing that India is not only a paradise for Western people to meditate. India is a very serious country with a very serious problem. And it's true. The India is also a country with great knowledge and with great technicians and so on. So, of course, the number of Indian engineers, for instance, is sometimes calculated wrongly. And Farid Zakaria and Dinesh de Souza, the most important two, one is liberal, the other is conservative. Farid Zakaria and Dinesh de Souza, they are both Indians who decided to become Americans, and they are the most famous two intellectuals of Indian origin in America. And they both say that although they are very different in their opinions about practically everything, they both stressed out this is pointed out to the situation that when you compare the number of engineers in America and in India, we must remember that they are calculated in different ways. For instance, in India, uh, sometimes the people who are taught to operate a very complicated machine, they are already titled as engineer. Whereas in America, to be called engineer, you must really build something. So yes, on paper, India is making like 3 times as many engineers as Americans during the year, which is impressive. But we must remember that half of those engineers are not really engineers in Western meaning of this word. They were much more radical ideas about the population control. Because Indira Gandhi, she was also a prime minister of India for many years. She was even thinking about castration, massive castration. But of course, it only provoked problems, and some people revolted against this idea, so she didn't do it, of course. And she was, by the way, she was killed by one of her Sikhs. Those are Sikhs, not Sikhs. Those are Sikhs from Punjab, the very particular ethnicity. They are very good as soldiers because they are big, and they are brave, and they can be bodyguards because they are very high, I mean tall. And already in British India, they were the people from Punjab, the Sikhs, were usually the best soldiers. So the Sikhs, one of the Sikhs murdered her because of some religious things, and but first and foremost, not but first and foremost, not because of these crazy ideas of castration, and not because of religious things, but first and foremost because Punjab in those days was contemplating on the idea of becoming independent from India. So he was a separatist. I think that war is not as probable as people say. People, you are looking for sensation. I think what China is trying to do in Taiwan is to scare the Taiwanese to join China. I think what Putin wants to make in the Ukraine, he wants to have the sanctions which were imposed when he first attacked Ukraine to be lifted. As in every country, some are and some are not. It was only contemplated castration. They never implemented it. Do you know that there was also some kind of vaccination in India like 2 decades ago, and there was an uproar in India because they were convinced that the Europeans who were conducting those vaccinations, they are probably making them infertile, and there was a huge problem, huge huge quarrel about it. Okay, I think it is enough for today, for tonight. I hope it was interesting. I will put the link to this discussion on the community site, right? So I wish you good evening, good rest of evening, and may the Vishnu and Indra be with you all, right? But remember, India is not only a place for the Westerners to meditate. It's a very serious country with very, very, very serious problems. Right? Good night. And may Indra and Vishnu be with you all. And also the god of the intellectuals, Ganesha. Good night. Sleep. Sleep well.